My sisters demanded I let them rent out my vacation home for profit. When I refused, their husbands broke in. Now they are facing charges. Hey everyone, I've been lurking here for a while and finally decided to share my story. Fair warning, it's a long one, but I hope it's worth the read. I also want to say up front that I've cut all contact with the people involved here, so there won't be any shocking updates or new drama. I feel like writing this out is a sort of closing the chapter for me. Let's get started. I, 34M, grew up in what I'd consider a fairly normal family. We were never super wealthy, but my parents worked hard and made sure we were comfortable. I have two sisters, Claire, 37F, and Vanessa, 35F. I also have a wife, Emma, 33F, whom I married about 6 years ago. Emma and I decided early on that we didn't want kids, which occasionally causes friction at family gatherings since Claire and Vanessa both have kids. Now here's a key piece of the story. My parents own a small lakeside vacation home that's been in the family for a long time. It's not huge, but it's in a gorgeous location near a popular tourist spot. My grandparents originally bought it decades ago and passed it down to my parents. As we grew up, my parents were pretty open about letting us use it for little weekend getaways or special occasions, but it was never intended as a free-for-all. We had to ask permission, schedule properly, and leave the place exactly as we found it. These rules existed for everyone in the family, including me. About 5 years ago, my parents gave Emma and me partial ownership of this vacation home because we were the ones who used it most responsibly, took care of maintenance, and invested time and money into improvements. My parents are getting older and rarely go there, so it made sense for me to manage the place. My sisters, on the other hand, never contributed financially or physically, like cleaning, repairs, etc. Yet they always wanted to use the vacation home. When I say use, I mean they wanted to come in large groups, throw parties, and leave a mess for me, or my parents, to clean up. Over the years, that sense of entitlement only got worse. As I'll explain in more detail, it eventually escalated into outright trespassing, property damage, and legal issues. It's been a wild ride. Claire and Vanessa started demanding access to the vacation home for business opportunities about 2 years ago. Their pitch was basically, you don't use it every single day, so why not let us rent it out on weekends to make money? They didn't want to simply borrow it. They wanted to profit from it. They intended to list it on every short-term rental site they could find. I have absolutely nothing against short-term rentals if the owners themselves manage them properly. But the place wasn't set up for that, and these two have a long history of neglecting basic responsibilities. Plus, this property has been in our family for a long time, and I wasn't comfortable handing it over to people who'd treat it like a hotel. It was a no-brainer for me to say, no, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in renting it out, especially not through them. Their reaction? Fury. They lost it, telling me I was selfish, greedy, and unfair for not letting them cash in on a property they didn't contribute to at all. Claire hinted that her household needed extra income because her husband, Tom, wasn't making enough at his job, and they'd appreciate if I could step aside and let them do their thing. Vanessa, whose husband Rob was also looking for side hustles, echoed the same. I firmly told them that the answer was no. That's when the ominous tension began, though at the time I had no idea it would escalate so severely. After I refused, I received a call from my property manager. I'd hired someone part-time to check on the place and handle yard work. He told me he'd found signs of forced entry, specifically scratches around the door locks. Nothing was stolen, but it was clear someone tried to break in. Turns out, the local sheriff's office later identified Tom and Rob, my sister's husbands, lurking around the property on camera. They were promptly taken into custody for trespassing and attempted break-in. Neither Claire nor Vanessa admitted fault on behalf of their husbands. They acted shocked and insisted the men were being treated unfairly, like it was some kind of misunderstanding. In reality, Tom and Rob had broken the law. My parents were furious with them, but my sisters still insisted that I was overreacting. Because Tom and Rob didn't cause major damage and the locks still worked, I initially considered letting it go, maybe with just a restraining order if they kept pushing. But looking back, I should have pushed harder for accountability right then. Not punishing that first break-in attempt, except for letting the local cops handle the trespassing charges, perhaps signaled that they could continue this behavior without facing serious consequences. Soon after that fiasco, my mother decided to host a family barbecue to clear the air and encourage everyone to work things out. I really didn't want to go, but my parents were pretty insistent. From the moment Emma and I arrived, I could feel the hostility. Claire and Vanessa were already drunk, like slurring words drunk, and so were Tom and Rob. They were sitting in a circle, glaring at me, whispering among themselves. The kids, Claire has 2, Vanessa has 3, were running around and screaming. Now, to be fair, I have no issue with kids being kids, but in this scenario, they were being downright feral. One of Vanessa's sons actually shoved an older relative into the pool. The poor guy was humiliated. Fortunately, he wasn't injured, but it was a total what the heck moment. Neither Vanessa nor Claire apologized. They merely waved it off, saying something like, "He's just playing lighten up." The bigger incident happened later. I was standing near the pool talking to my cousin when the same kid and one of Claire's daughters tried to push me in. Normally, I wouldn't mind a playful splash, but we could all see they were doing it out of malice, not play. I dodged at the last moment, causing them to lose their balance and topple in themselves. Immediately, Claire and Vanessa started screaming at me about how I endangered their children and almost made them drown. Mind you, these are kids who apparently love the water and have taken swimming lessons, so this wasn't a near-death scenario at all. And from my vantage point, they were trying to push me first. The whole thing blew up. Claire and Vanessa were shrieking about how Emma and I are child-free by choice, and obviously hate children. They tried to twist this whole situation to make it look like I'd basically shoved the kids into the pool. Everyone who saw the incident knew that wasn't what happened, but you can't reason with drunks. My parents tried to calm them down, but it was useless. After the barbecue, there was a ridiculous group text that included me, Emma, my parents, and my sisters, and their husbands. Claire and Vanessa typed out paragraphs insulting me, calling me greedy again for hoarding the vacation home, and also insulting Emma for being snobby and looking down on them. She does no such thing. She simply stands her ground and doesn't engage in drama, which is probably what bothers them most. Meanwhile, Tom and Rob decided to chime in with half-coherent voice notes, slurring out nasty comments. They blamed me for ruining a good family event and showing off that we had more money. It was basically a rolling dumpster fire in text form. Eventually, Emma and I blocked all 4 of them: Claire, Vanessa, Tom, and Rob. I told my parents I was done engaging. If they wanted to talk about something important, they could do it directly with me or Emma in a separate thread. This was the catalyst for my parents to, finally, set some boundaries of their own. They told Claire and Vanessa that they were officially banned from using the vacation home. At that time, my parents still had some ownership rights, though I was the main caretaker, and they wanted to cut that off immediately. Things escalated even further when I discovered that Claire had been renting out the vacation home behind my back for at least a couple of years. She had made herself a copy of the old house keys, likely from a time we all visited together, and had been listing the property on some short-term rental platforms without my knowledge. Looking back, certain weird things about the house made sense. Random items in the trash, extra wear and tear, or unusual utility bill fluctuations. At first, I assumed maybe my parents or some extended relatives were using the place. Then I installed a better security system and realized no one had asked me for the passcodes. My old lock system was a standard deadbolt, which they must have had a key for. Claire was raking in money, or so I thought. The twist? She and Tom actually had severe financial trouble, with maxed out credit cards and leased cars nearing repossession. All the money she'd earned from her shady rentals must have gone straight into paying off debt, or perhaps fueling more reckless spending. Vanessa admitted she'd known about it for a while, but kept quiet to keep the peace. That was the final straw. I confronted both of them, over text because they were still blocked on my phone. I threatened legal action for theft of services, unauthorized entry, basically anything I could. I told them that the free ride was over, that if they tried to touch that house again, I would come down on them hard. A week after that, Claire and Vanessa showed up at my actual home, banging on my front door like they were the police. Emma and I happened to be in the kitchen, and she looked at me like, "Should we even open the door?" We ended up answering because they wouldn't stop banging, and we were worried about them making a scene in our neighborhood. They stormed in, ignoring our attempts to keep them outside, and started yelling about how we owe them. They said since Emma and I have more money, true, Emma's family is quite well off, and we both have stable careers, we should be providing for our nieces and nephews. Specifically, they insisted that we pay for their kids' college educations. Emma threatened to call the cops if they didn't leave. They hurled insults, calling us child haters and stuck up, then stormed off, slamming the door so hard it cracked the door frame. Right after that, I had the locks changed at the vacation home. I also installed security cameras and hired a full-time property manager. I wanted a professional on call who could monitor the house's security feeds and handle any nonsense if, or more accurately, when it came up. Not long after the confrontation at my home, my property manager called me to say he'd just kicked Rob, Vanessa's husband, and a couple of his buddies off the property. They showed up with beer coolers, apparently ready to treat it as their personal hangout spot for the weekend. The new security cameras caught them, and the property manager asked them to leave. Rob tried to argue that this place belongs to my family, but the property manager told them they'd be charged with trespassing if they didn't exit immediately. They left, but that was enough for me to call the cops and file a formal no trespassing order. At this point, I was sure the drama was over. I thought they'd finally gotten the message. A couple of weeks after Rob's hangout fiasco, I got an urgent call from my property manager. He said that someone had broken in using heavy tools and there was damage to the gates and the door. The manager had noticed suspicious activity on the security cameras and called the sheriff. And by the time officers arrived, Tom and Rob were inside, rummaging around like they owned the place. Both of them were arrested on multiple charges: breaking, vandalism, trespassing, and more. The property damage was actually fairly significant. The door frame was destroyed, part of the gate needed welding, and a window was cracked. Not to mention, they probably cost me in potential security deposit returns for the next set of legitimate renters. Emma and I occasionally let close friends or extended family use it, with explicit permission. Claire and Vanessa somehow acted like they had no idea what their husbands were up to. They begged my parents to intervene, to get me to drop the charges. My parents, for once, stood firm. They insisted that Claire and Vanessa repay all the damages if they wanted me to even consider dropping the charges. Claire and Vanessa were furious, but they had no leg to stand on. They whined that they didn't have the money for it, that it wasn't fair, that it was just a big misunderstanding. A few days later, I received a formal apology letter from Tom and Rob and a $5,000 cashier's check to cover damages. In truth, the damages were a little less than that amount, so I considered it a good start. My lawyer drafted a settlement agreement that included a mutual restraining order. If Tom and Rob violated the restraining order by coming near me, my wife, or the vacation home again, they'd face immediate legal consequences. With that agreement in place and a promise of full reimbursement, the charges against them were dropped. They narrowly avoided more severe legal repercussions, at least for the time being. It was a relief to have some resolution, but by that point, Emma and I were both mentally exhausted. We told our lawyer to finalize the no-contact order, and we resolved never to communicate with Claire, Vanessa, or their husbands again. My parents were on board. Though they still talked to Claire and Vanessa occasionally, they agreed to respect our decision to remain no contact. They also refused to let my sisters anywhere near the vacation home and threatened to call the police if they even tried. I finally understood that this whole saga had deep roots. Claire and Vanessa have always seemed resentful of my success. First when I was the youngest sibling to buy a house, and even more so after I married Emma, whose family is well off. It's not that I ever flaunted money. I just worked hard, saved, and married someone financially stable. There's no shame in that, but apparently it was a target on my back from my own sisters. At least my parents finally put their foot down. That was something I'd been hoping for years. They recognized that while they loved all their children, Claire and Vanessa crossed a line from which there was no easy return. If you break in using an angle grinder, that's not a harmless mistake. That's deliberate criminal activity. Now Emma and I keep the vacation home fully secured. We've improved the security system even more, adding additional cameras, motion detectors, and an alarm that directly contacts the sheriff's department. Unfortunately, it had to come to this, but at least we don't have to worry as much anymore. Despite all this, I admit there's a small part of me that's sad it ended this way. Of course, I am relieved we're safe and have legal protection, but I also mourn the idea of having a normal relationship with my siblings. We were never extremely close, but we didn't always hate each other's guts either. Life circumstances, jealousy, and a lot of poor choices turned them into people I hardly recognize. I'm at peace with the decision to go no contact. My mental health improved drastically once I stopped giving them the chance to drag me into their chaos. I'm focusing on maintaining healthy relationships with my parents and the rest of my extended family. I'm grateful that my wife and I are okay, that the damage to the house was fixable, and that justice was served in some capacity. I'm also thankful that my parents had our backs when it truly counted. As for Claire and Vanessa, from what I hear, they're still dealing with money issues, but that's none of my concern anymore. So that's my story. It's long, it's messy, and it still feels surreal to me. But it's a chapter of my life that's closed for good. My only hope is that my sisters learn some sort of lesson from this.